Welcome to the raw and uncensored Ambitchious podcast. During our time here together, I will be instilling all of the strength, power, and determination you will need to use the very stones thrown at you to build your ultimate empire. We will redefine the word bitch from the derogatory to the acronym being in total control of herself. So let's adjust our crowns and prepare to live life ambitiously. Yeah, here I am, the original HBIC, Katie motherfucking Boyd. And as Brittany has sang about in the past, yo, toxic. Yeah, that's what we're talking about today. We're talking about toxicity and when and how to cut toxic motherfuckers out of your life. Because I'm telling you right now that having toxic people who bring you down, that constantly bring negativity and just dysfunctional patterns to your life, I pinky swear promise. Okay? If you see me here, I'm pinky swearing right now. My little pinky is up in the air, and I'm pinky swear promising that the reason why you are not living your most ambitious life is because you're surrounded by a bunch of toxic assholes. I know it's the craziest thing. I've had to have many a conversation in the last couple of months about my own life. I was feeling like really shitty about myself in the last couple of months. Like I was like, there's just something that's just not working out. There's just something that's not jiving. And I could not put my finger on it. And then I started realizing like how many people, I had to take a consensus really of how many people in my life were bringing me joy and happiness and just great experiences, great life experiences. And how many people were just dragging me down. Like when I saw their name on my phone, like light up, I was like, fuck. Do you ever really want to live your life like that when you actually look at your phone ringing and you're like, God damn, I don't want to. But I am the queen of ambitious land, as you all know. And I have amazing boundaries and I'm strong and I'm tough and I'm powerful and I know why I'm here. And the reason why I'm telling you this is because me too, I get wrapped up in toxicity as well. It's a bad habit. It's in the groove patterns of my brain, just like a lot of you out there. And I'm also a helper. I want to help people. That's just in my DNA. And sometimes like these people, they don't deserve the motherfucking help. And, there's this story. It's an old story. I think it's like a Buddhist story, if I'm not mistaken, but I'm going to butcher it. But here it goes. There was this monk who every morning would go down to this lake and he would just sit and meditate and just touch some grass and just like feel himself or whatever. And one day he went down to the lake in the morning and there was a big spider in the water. And the spider was like flailing all around it. The spider was drowning. And the monk went into the water and he took the spider in his hands and cupped the spider. And then as he went to go put the spider down on the shore and dry land, the spider bit him. He was like, dude, this is definitely not in the story, but he was like, dude, why the fuck are you biting me, dude? I just saved your life. And the spider just like looked at him like, okay, motherfucker, and just like went on his little spider way. Then the next day, same thing happened. There's that motherfucking spider in the water again, flailing around, flopping his little hairy legs, all 8 of them. And once again, because the monk is a good person, he's a good, loving, kind person. What does he do? He scoops the fucking spider out of the water again. And then once again, the spider bites him. And he's like, what the fuck? This is the second day I saved your motherfucking life. And this is how you're going to repay me? The spider just gave him a smirk, walks on. The third day he goes out there. Same thing. The spider's in the water, flopping around. And he picks up the spider and the spider once again bites him. And he's like, why do you keep biting me? And the spider literally looks at him and goes, dude, I'm a spider. That's what we do. And the reason why I'm telling you this story is toxic people are like the spider. They are going to fuck up your life. They are going to bring havoc. They are going to bring chaos. They are going to bring drama. They are going to bring discomfort and anger and sadness and anxiety and depression, not because they're evil people. It's because that's how they're wired. That's who they are. And a lot of these people, even though they can help it if they did the work, like if they listened to the Ambitchious podcast, they showed up in their lives with purpose and power, but 98% of the human population is like the spider. And then there's 2% of the population, which is like me and all of you out there listening in Ambitchious land, that are waking up every day to be the best versions of themselves, even if it's just a little bit better than they were yesterday. And so I'm here to tell you that if the spider's biting you and you're like, what the fuck? You're feeling like the monk. It's time to let that spider drown. I hate to say it like this, but it's time to let the spider drown. It is going to be the most freeing, liberating experiences of your life to cut these toxic people. And these toxic people can be anyone. They can be family members, they can be friends, they can be colleagues and coworkers, they can be people that you sit next to at your local bar who, maybe they know that you don't like to talk about politics, but every fucking time you go in there, they try to ply you with politics or ply you with talking about shit that you don't want to talk about. Or they just have really poor boundaries and they shit all over you. Or they trigger you in some sort of way, right? I'm not saying that on this earth plane that we are going to get off this earth unscathed. But what I'm saying is you can mitigate so much of the pain in your life by simply cutting out the people who are not vibing at your correct highest vibrational frequency. You got to cut out the spiders. And today I'm going to talk about the toxic people in your life, how to spot them, and the best way to start distancing yourself from them. And as you know, it goes without saying that toxic people of all shapes and sizes and walks of life and sexual orientation, they're a problem and they're everywhere. They're everywhere. And they can drain you mentally, and they can drain your emotional resources, and they can hijack your sense of self, and they can affect your mood. They can affect your outlook on life. They can create stressful day-to-day comings and goings, and they can make you unhappy, and they can also make you doubt your feelings and experiences. That's where gaslighters and narcissists come in. We've done plenty of podcasts about them. I'm sure we'll touch upon a lot of that today in this podcast. But they're going to slowly sabotage you, and they're going to slowly pull you away from your best life. And if you're like me and you wake up every day and you say, okay, is the thing I'm about to do going to get me closer to or further away from the person I desire to be? Then the answer is no, right? But these people are going to pull you away from your health and your wealth and your power. And they're going to actually make you this is what happened to me. It makes you distrustful. And I always thought that I was an extrovert. And then during the pandemic, I thought I was an introvert, but I just realized a lot of it was just like fear and emotional psyoping. But now I'm starting to realize how much I love people, and I'm remembering who I was before. And I'm starting to realize that the reason why I always feel shitty around certain people is because they're shitty. There's no other fucking way, shape or form to talk about it. So if we can get rid of these toxic relationships out of our lives, it's going to change the game. We're going to step deeper into our power. We're going to step deeper into our purpose. And toxic relationships are also truly, this is another thing, they're hard on the body. And I did a lot of research for this podcast. And did you know that studies have shown that people in adverse close relationships give a greater risk of heart disease? They have a greater risk of heart disease. And researchers have also found that hostile marital interactions can even slow wound healing. That's crazy to me. And it also will affect stress, and it'll affect sleep quality, your immune system, and your adrenal production, as well as your hormones. So if you're feeling lately like a bag of smashed assholes, and you're wondering what you're eating or what you're drinking or what you're doing wrong, it's probably not any of that. It's probably you're surrounded by a bunch of toxic avengers, like a bunch of toxic assholes. And the quality of our relationships, in my opinion, and in the opinion of a lot of researchers, is one of the greatest determinants of our health, our happiness, and our success in our ambitious lives. And in many ways, we experience the world and ourselves through the people in our lives. The healthier the people, the healthier your life. And the more problematic the people, the more problematic your life is going to be. And I've noticed that I've had a lot of people in my life in the past, and I've talked about this ad nauseum on the podcast over the years, where I always just felt like shit. And then I stopped talking to these people and I cut these people out of my life. And all of a sudden I felt like I was reborn. Like I was like a brand new baby. I was like, wow, I have all this energy. This is amazing. Where did this come from? It's because I got rid of the drain, the albatross that was around my neck when I was hanging out with these toxic people. So whether you in ambitious land, right, you're trying to be the HBIC of your life and you're dealing with a parasitic boss or manipulative friend or a pessimistic mom or a spiteful colleague or a jealous partner, I mean, this is all real shit. The toxicity is eating you up. It's parasitical. It's literally eating you from the inside out. And it could also be feeding certain toxic responses in you. So if you're like, I'm a pretty happy person, but every time I get around Jane or, Alan, I get angry and I'm triggered and I feel mean and I feel like rageful or, I'm a little cunty. It's probably because that person is a mirror to something in you that you haven't healed. So in that way, being around that toxic person can help you heal if you're aware of what it's doing to you. But most people aren't because they haven't done that healing work. So if you've ever, felt like shit around after hanging out with someone or pessimistic or negative or extra cunty, after you hung out with a certain, coworker or friend, it's probably because they're like a virus in your life and you don't even realize it. You really just don't realize it. So I'm going to talk first about the signs that you're in or having toxic relationships in your life, because I think a lot of people, they don't even realize that like they have toxicity in their life. They're sometimes, and this was for me personally, I was so used to being around the toxicity and around the drama and the gossip and the that I just was like, oh, this is just how life is. And then when I stopped it, I was like, oh, shit. Like, it's not me. It was the person that I was spending all this time with that was doing something internally to me that was making me show up as a certain type of person, right? So here's some signs that you are around a toxic person. So the first one, this is huge, okay? They disrespect the boundaries that you've put into play. And as you guys know, over the last couple of weeks on the Ambitchious podcast, I've had 3 episodes that are just solely a deep dive into all things boundaries. So you haven't listened to those 3 podcasts, stop what you're doing and go back to number 1 of that, because this is all going to tie in together. But toxic people in general really struggle to honor other people's boundaries and other people's limitations that they put on certain aspects of the relationship. In fact, coming up against a firm boundary, this is crazy, often provokes a toxic person into acting even more aggressive and even more toxic. While healthy and well-adjusted people will acknowledge people's appropriate limits, even if those limits make them angry or feel hurt or whatever, a toxic person will tend to keep challenging and negotiating and violating your boundaries in order to maintain their access to you. And in many cases, they know from experience that they will eventually wear you down, which only reinforces their toxic behavior. And if you pull back from a person, it'll only provoke them further. So this is why down the road in this podcast, we're going to talk about how to handle these people, because sometimes when you pull away, it can blow the situation up. I know in the past I've pulled away from certain people and they've, gone on Facebook and said all kinds of lies about me or told people my personal business that I, entrusted with them, or they've threatened, like, I'm going to expose you and tell people who, all these people who you really are. And I'm like, okay, well, go ahead. And if they listen, then they probably weren't my friends in the first place or whatever. So when you're pulling away from these type of toxic people, it can be even harder. So listen to the end of the podcast when we actually talk about how to handle these types. The next one is they're manipulative or controlling. So toxicity often takes the form of manipulation and control. And to a toxic person, remember, they don't know they're toxic, by the way. This is the whole fucking situation. They don't know that they're toxic. So a toxic person, relationships aren't true relationships based on mutual love and respect, but it's more a means to an end. And that end could be any number of things: a sense of power, of gratification from directing another person's actions, a reassurance that they're liked and they're needed, or access to material wealth or material benefits. And if you ever feel that you are being used as a pawn in a larger strategy or as a means to an end at your own expense, then you're definitely in a toxic dynamic. And sometimes manipulation and control are hard to notice, especially in the beginning. You'll have to be very tuned in to your emotional responses to recognize these patterns. But we're going to return to that in a moment when I talk about how to get rid of these motherfuckers. The next one is, this is one of my biggest things because betrayal trauma is my number one core wound, is they lie. So they betray you, they betray your trust, they lie about you, they take things that you've said and they lie or they manipulate. So in generally speaking, toxic people are not good friends with reality. That's just the bottom line. And they often maintain a separate reality, a self-created narrative in which their needs and interests always are going to dominate everything else, period. And to that end, they may twist facts, hide information, and overtly lie to the people around them and even themselves. When confronted, they'll even resist owning up to their deceit, even strangely enough, when it's about like just tiny, small things. A lot of people who are narcissists, who are narcs, they lie when they can easily tell the truth and it will not get them in trouble. Like they might be like, oh, see this coffee cup right here? Like I bought this in the Andalusian mountains in 1972. It cost $3 million. It's like, no, dude, I got this for free. Like, you know what I mean? Like stupid little fake reality types of things. Those are mostly gaslighting narcissists that do that. But let me just tell you, and gaslighting narcissists are fucking toxic people. They're probably the numero uno offenders. So whether they're lying to manipulate another person, to enhance their reputation, to secure a desired outcome, or to mask their shame, toxic people always rely on lies as part of their everyday operating systems. So if you ever catch someone in a deliberate lie, even about something seemingly minor, like weekend plans or a small debt, take notice, because people show you who they are the first time. And we as like loving, kind humans are like, we always try to give people the benefit of the doubt. And I'm telling you, do not give anyone the benefit of the doubt. People need to prove to you that they belong in your life and they're worthy of belonging in your ambitious life. That's just point blank. It's not me trying to be better than anyone or trying to be like an elitist. This is damn truth. We allow too many dinkleberries to hang on to our asshole hairs way too much. And then we wonder why we feel like shit 24/7. Well, that's why, because you're around a bunch of lying snakes. So that is one of the biggest things too, is with people who are liars, is they are doing this to create like a larger narrative, right? And so it also helps them play the victim. That's another thing when people lie. They'll be like, oh, everyone wants me to fail. And it's like, shut the fuck up. The next one is they always, always have to be right. I know all these motherfuckers, people's heads are popping up in your head right now. And you're like, oh, that's Sally. That's Jessica. That's the cat down the road. Yes. Toxic people often struggle to admit when they're wrong because recognizing, this is the clincher, recognizing that they've made a mistake or even just like a minor one or hurt another person is too threatening to the ego that they've created. And to preserve this whole, justifying their behavior thing, right? So they'll say, like, well, I had to lie about the job offer to be treated fairly. Or they'll deny another person's perspective, like, you're being overly sensitive. Like, you hear people say, like, you're being overly sensitive, you're being too sensitive. Or they project their weaknesses on or shame onto others, especially you, because we're talking about you with other people. They'll say, like, well, you're the one who fill in the blank, right? And in most cases, there's no healthy, fair, or productive conflict with a toxic person like this. It's just not. And they're always going to be right. And they're always going to prioritize their sense of self above everyone else's sense of self. And they'll never, ever own up to their mistakes. They'll never apologize, but they're often more than happy to broadcast all of your mistakes. Yeah, you know the person I'm talking about. The next one, and we talked about this again ad nauseum on the podcast, they always play the victim. I did, I think, about 4 or 5 podcasts ago, the victim podcast. Go back and listen to that one too, if you haven't already. But a toxic corollary to the need to be right and the tendency to play victim. And in a world where there can't be wrong, dysfunctional people will often default to being the wronged party. And if someone appropriately challenges them, they tend to experience that challenge as an accusation or an attack. And if a situation doesn't go their way, they tend to attribute their failure to other people or forces. Where a healthy person experiences an injury or a setback, susses out their role in a situation, and then identifies the piece of it that they can work on, a toxic person immediately shifts into self-pitying, woe is me mode. And the problem is out there, and the top priority is to feel validated, comforted, and secure. And the worldview that these people have serves a few purposes. So number one, it enhances their identity, it generates sympathy or attention, and it lets them off the hook, because toxic people, generally speaking, also struggle to take any real accountability for their actions. And that's just the fucking truth. Like, it's just the small things like that. Like, if like you say, oh, like, well, you didn't do it this way. And the person will say, well, but you said that. And I'm like, I can go back to my text messages and I can screenshot the shit. I did not say that. It's like, they can't just be like, you know what? I'm really sorry. That was stupid. Or I fucked up. Stay away from these people. The next one is they're judgmental. I fucking hate judgmental people. I can't handle it. As human beings are all judgmental. We are, to a point. Having opinions is just part of our wiring. But a toxic person embraces and acts on those judgments to a problematic degree. They tend to view the world through a very rigid lens of usually negative and self-serving opinions. And if you haven't read my book yet, there's a whole chapter on being rigid and flexible. It's so important to be ambitious, to be more flexible, because rigidity it just makes you snap. And I have been I am rigid in a lot of ways still. I'm working on it, but I have been really rigid in the past, and it doesn't help. It does not help. So these people struggle to approach other people with empathy, curiosity, and openness, just an open heart. And as a result, criticizing and gossiping are almost a sport to them. Of course, that criticism or gossip usually serves to boost their self-esteem or mask their envy by diminishing every other person around them. These people, they're like, oh my God, look at what this girl's wearing. What the fuck? This fat bitch, this person. Oh, did you hear so-and-so? She's like cheating on her husband with so-and-so. It's like, who cares? Mind your fucking business. Is your life so pristine that you are not at fault? I mean, you're in a fucking glass house, bitch. You shouldn't be throwing a fucking nothing, not even a pebble, never mind a fucking stone, So the real issue here is extremely toxic people will then act on those judgments in dysfunctional ways by mistaking them for truth, inappropriately expressing them to other people, or using them to achieve questionable ends. Unsurprisingly, they rarely praise or celebrate other people unless, of course, doing so would benefit them. Motherfucker can't give a compliment. They ain't cute. Being casually or occasionally judgmental isn't a toxic trait. We all do it, okay? Even me. I'm not going to do it all the time. We all engage in judgment from time to time, but when a person consistently and unkindly judges other people and situations and makes fun of them and struggles to appreciate another angle of that person, that's when this quality becomes toxic. And of course, that's judgment is often a projected expression of their own shame and self-loathing. It always has to do with their own shit. Usually when people call other people names or fat or whore or whatever the fuck, it's because they feel insecure in that way about themselves. You know, it's like people who are like really super churchy, and I love baby Jesus, but people who are so churchy are the biggest, most judgmental people in the world. It's like, damn, like, have you ever read the motherfucking Bible? He is without fault, cast the first stone. Like, back up, back the fuck up. The next one is they're all take and no give. Oh, this one really gets me. So toxic relationships are usually predicated on one key objective: self-enhancement. To a toxic person, a relationship isn't healthy. It's not dynamic. It's not a generous vehicle for shared value. It's a parasitical, one-sided arrangement designed to fulfill the toxic party's interests only. Toxic people will take any form of value they need: time, energy, attention, affection, possessions, materialism, expertise, pleasure, social status, and even other relationships. In return, they'll offer very little. Every decision they make in a relationship is designed to preserve access to those goods they want the most. Everyone they encounter is just a means to an end. This is sick, but it's so true. Some toxic people consciously know this and move through life with this objective in mind. Other toxic people act unconsciously, ignorant of the fact that their relationships are utilitarian, which in some ways is even more unsettling. Either way, toxic people struggle to appreciate another person's experience. And if they could, the parasitic nature of a relationship would break down. Period. The next one is they leave you feeling drained. And this one is like such a telltale sign because it's such an instant thing where you feel good, you hang out with the person, you feel like a bag of smashed assholes after they leave. That is like public enemy sign numero uno. And some of these toxic traits are tricky to spot in other people. Then it might be helpful to consider one last symptom: how a toxic person makes you feel. Truly toxic people have a way of making you feel drained and diminished. You have less physical and mental energy after spending time with them, not more. They also have a profound effect on your sense of self, and they often leave you feeling low, demoralized, unconfident, underappreciated, unsteady, and sometimes it's their ideas that infect your mind. So, for example, when you notice yourself adopting the same negative thoughts that a toxic person holds. How many times have you been around toxic people? They say something, you're like, oh, it's not really how I feel. And then all of a sudden you start thinking it. You're like, where is this coming from? Toxic people can also leave you feeling vaguely icky. Like you get that ick feeling. You know what I'm saying? You know that feeling. You know what I'm talking about. As if you've been contaminated, or they just shit diarrhea explosion, right? They had the crabapple splatters of the toxic diarrhea energy all over you. And it just feels gross. You feel confused. You feel uncomfortable. You just feel like something isn't right. And that is sometimes one of the clearest indications that you are in the presence of a truly toxic and problematic person. Checking in with your subjective experience is extremely helpful because our visceral responses are always meaningful. And I just think that intuitively, if we were really open and honest with ourselves, we would truly know that this person's not good for us. But we as women, I know why it is, but we've had like that intuition beaten out of us. We don't trust your gut. And it's like, no, we have to. That is like, we were built with that radar system in our bodies, and we tamp it down, and that's not helping us make wise, healthy decisions as ambitious women. But this indicator also can be truly tricky. Our conditioning, as I just said, plays a huge role in how we respond to difficult people. If our threshold for conflict is very low, so a lot of people are like, I hate conflict, I hate it. A merely unpleasant person might register as a highly toxic person. By the same token, a truly dangerous individual might register as merely eccentric. If we were to say brought up in a family full of toxic behavior, I'm more the latter, where I've been around so much drama and so much abuse and so much toxicity in my life that you really have to be a wild nut job to really get me going. Like, I'm like, oh, something's wrong with this person. But if you're just like a little fucking asinine, I'll kind of deal with you, which is bad. And I'm working on that every day. So, only in as much as we interpret them correctly, hold them alongside other data, and use them to draw accurate conclusions. Our visceral reaction to a toxic person contains a ton of data. But that data sometimes says more about us than it does about the other person. Or, as is usually the case, a lot about both. Then we, as ambitious women, have to figure out whether the stimulus is as problematic as the response. Still, your gut feeling is worth paying attention to because toxic people can hide their toxic traits, but they can't mask your response to them. You might not always be able to see someone's manipulation clearly, but you can almost always feel when you're being manipulated. That's the one domain a toxic person can't touch. And that's what makes this toxic trait so useful to track. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the spectrum of toxicity. So after I've just gone through all the telltale signs of a toxic person, you right now are probably driving in your car or pushing your baby carriage, or you're on the treadmill at the studio or at the gym, and you're struggling to figure out exactly who in your life is truly toxic and really problematic. And that's one of the tricky things about recognizing a toxic person. They don't always neatly fall into the categories that I just spoke about before. And they don't always consistently exhibit these traits all the time. So, for example, what do you do about the colleague or the coworker who wants all of your sales leads, but backs off when you tell them no? I've had this happen to me before years ago. How do you deal with that aunt who gossips about you behind your back, but then genuinely seems contrite when you confront her? What about the neighbor who constantly complains that the other tenants in your apartment complex are ganging up on him, but is genuinely compassionate towards other people? Human beings, as we all know, are motherfucking complex animals. They don't always conform to neat theories and tidy categories. And sometimes people are overtly, undeniably toxic, which makes them easy to spot. But even more people exhibit shades of toxicity or degrees, if you will, of dysfunction. And that can be tough to diagnose. Still, others, and this includes most healthy people too, have moments or periods of toxicity. I do all the time. I can get toxic really quick. I can go into old patterning, old programming really quick. Like my husband and I have this thing where if like one of us gets like negative, we'll call each other out and be like, dude, you're like, change your language. You're talking like negative. Why would you say it like that? Like you are creating and manifesting your own life. Like, do you really want to say it like that? Do you really want to like show up that way? And like, that's so important to have people in your life that are going to call you to the carpet. And that's okay. Like we're not perfect. We're crazy human beings. Okay. We're not perfect by any means. An unkind opinion fossilizes into a damaging judgment. A sense of helplessness devolves into victim identity. Does that make people toxic? That's the real question here. So, like I said before, there's no easy answer, but the psychology of toxicity is complicated. But a helpful concept to keep in mind is that there are spectrums of toxicity and toxic behavior. So, one of those spectrums applies to people in general. So on one end of that spectrum, you have an obviously predatory, manipulative, judgmental, self-serving, narcissistic, gaslighting motherfucker. Okay. We all know that person. And on the other end of that spectrum, you have a collaborative, respectful, kind, empathetic, loving person. And then you have a bunch of individuals who kind of sprinkle and sprinkle and they kind of fall somewhere in between, or they may have like these little moments of toxicity. The other useful spectrum applies to each of these specific toxic traits. So take victim mentality, for example. On one end of that spectrum of victim mentality, you have like a highly defended, deluded, unaccountable person. And on the other end of that spectrum, you have an appropriately vulnerable, honest, responsible, loving, kind person. And then you have a bunch of people who feel both attacked and empowered to do something about it, or have some moments where they feel helpless and self-pitying, and other moments where they can take ownership and they can assert control in their lives. And people can really fall anywhere on the first spectrum. And people can also exhibit different degrees or durations of each toxic quality on a second spectrum. So classifying toxic people isn't just quite, I guess, cut and dry as most like pop psychology makes it seem. But appreciating the nuances of how people behave can actually lead to better outcomes. And I feel like this recently, like you see all of like this, people talking about narcissistic personality disorder and all these different like personality disorders. And it's like, not a lot of people in this world really have true personality disorders. Some people are just assholes sometimes. Some people are just dickwads sometimes and little cunts. Okay. And that's just the real truth. So I think that sometimes we as consumers of content like this, we're just like, oh my God, that person's a narcissistic gaslighting person. And it's like, no, they're not. They're just being an asshole right now. Or maybe like your vibrational frequency and their vibrational frequency does not mesh and you should not be friends with them. It doesn't mean that they're like the next Jeffrey fucking Dahmer or like Charlie Manson. You know what I mean? So we have to give people a little bit of a break, but at the same time, we have to educate ourselves and like know how to, spot these different people and which spectrum that they're on. So if someone falls clearly on the problematic end of the spectrums that I just mentioned in general, or one very specific trait, then you'll have a more confident and informed time where you really understand, like, is this person going to stay in my life, or should I really start to distance myself from them because it's not bringing me the joy and the happiness and the fulfillment of this relationship that I desire? And if they fall somewhere in the middle of that spectrum, then you really, truly, as an ambitious woman, have to decide whether those traits meet a truly toxic threshold, whether you can tolerate these issues or not, and whether you have the kind of the energy to really want to pour into this relationship and help these people improve. And that's not really your decision, but you can offer help. Like if someone's like, I'm an asshole, and could you help me with this? Like Matt and I, we're like, when we're acting like assholes, when I'm acting like an idiot and you're acting like an imbecile, we got to call each other to the carpet. But not everyone has that kind of relationship. And that is truly what I desire for each and every one of you out there, is to have someone like a Matt in your life or a close friend in your life that will be like your carpet caller. Like, yo, you're being an asshole. You're not being in total control of yourself. You're not being the HBIC. You're not being ambitious, right? And so that's a really personal decision. And you have to factor in a lot of data to make the right decision, including your history with the person, your interest in the relationship, and their capacity for self-reflection and change. And also recognizing that shades of toxicity can exist in everyone, including you, including me. And that's a very helpful reminder as well. And the goal of this podcast really isn't to condemn anyone who exhibits any sign of dysfunction. It's really more to appreciate that while they're overtly toxic people to stay away from, there's also a lot of nuances to dysfunctional behavior. And we can't make wise decisions about people in our lives, or even help ourselves for that matter, without appreciating that there's all these different shades of fucked upness and dysfunction, okay, and toxicity. And finally, it's really important to remember that there's a difference between toxicity and dysfunction, between poisonous behavior and problematic behavior. And people tend, like I was saying before, they tend to throw around the word toxic so much. Like it's just one of these buzzwords that are just thrown around like fucking Salt Bay. Is he even a thing? His restaurant just closed down in Boston, so maybe it's not a thing. But people just throw it around, and it's like, it can really fuck people's lives up, and you can really pigeonhole them if that, toxic energy is applied too liberally to a person. So if your coworker gets territorial one time in a meeting, or a friend challenges an opinion of yours, or a family member questions your choices, they're probably not toxic, even if they also happen to be aggressive, tough, or overbearing. And similarly, a partner who refuses to validate your behavior, a peer or a friend who sees the world very differently from you, or a cousin who relies on you a little too much during a personal crisis, these folks aren't toxic. These people aren't truly toxic, even if their behavior can occasionally be problematic. They're just going through life and they're just trying to figure shit out. And sometimes it's messy. And conflict does not automatically entail toxicity. Problematic behavior is not always poisonous. Self-interest is not always predatory. Fighting is not always hurtful. And challenging is not always a manipulation. And most importantly, noticing a person's bad behavior doesn't automatically mean that they're a bad person. You'll probably encounter plenty of demanding, difficult, and undesirable assholes in your life, and that's just the fucking truth. But that doesn't mean that you need to cut them all off. And indeed, there are many, many situations where cutting someone off, even someone who is truly problematic, isn't prudent or even possible. So, as you reflect on all your relationships, make sure that you're not painting with too broad a paint stroke, and resist the urge to label any form of appropriate conflict as toxic, because when you do, you diminish the utility of the term. And you also disempower yourself by avoiding some of the healthy conflict that life truly requires. So, all that being said, you've done your due diligence. You've listened to this podcast. You've thought of all the people in your life that rub you the wrong way and make you feel not so fresh sometimes. And you've come to the conclusion that there are like a handful of people that are really toxic and they may need to be cut off, or you may need to create some distance in between you and them. And that's okay. And I'm going to talk about how to do that. So obviously, as we said before in this podcast, everyone has a different threshold for difficult behavior, and every relationship comes with its own standards and expectation. For example, you may have a toxic sibling, and that might deserve several chances to correct their behavior, whereas you don't need to think twice about distancing yourself from just like a toxic stranger that you met at a bar, okay? Your sister and some asshole at a bar are two different energies, okay? So you may have a toxic relationship with a parent that still may require some contact for practical reasons, while a toxic friend can make no claim on your time and energy. And setting and context matter as well. So, for example, you might still need to interact with a toxic coworker in like every day at your job, and cutting them off completely might be totally impractical. It may not be feasible. Like if you sit in a cubicle next to this person, it may not be like, hey, I'm moving to this other part of you moving to another cubicle, a different part of the business, right? And this person could also be damaging your performance at your job just by simply sitting next to them and having their toxic energy leak over into your cubicle. And similarly, you might have to tolerate a toxic cousin if it means spending time with family members you love, or put up with a toxic ex if it means you're sharing custody of a child. Like if you fuck a dude and you have a kid with him, you're going to have to put up with that motherfucker for the rest of your life, not till the kid's 18, because the kid's probably going to get married, have children, do whatever. You're going to have to go to their graduations, different milestones in their life. And you're going to have to see that motherfucker. That's why it's like, when you spread your legs, honey, you need to know what you're getting yourself into, child. Okay. Know what I'm saying? So, sometimes we just don't have the luxury of cutting off problematic people in our lives completely. And sometimes cutting a toxic person off is a matter of different degrees, right? And all of which is to say that there is no perfect formula for cutting someone off, but there are a few guiding principles, of course, that can help you manage a difficult relationship in the best possible way. So the first way that we're going to do this is we're going to determine the degree of distance that's needed in this relationship. So cutting off a toxic person doesn't always require a formal, total, kablooey breakup. It doesn't have to be like this, like, it doesn't have to be that way. Okay. And again, the relationship, the context, and the setting will play a big role in what relationships look like. So for example, again, cutting someone off might just mean pulling back on the amount of time you spend with them without formally notifying them of the decision. That also usually means recategorizing fuck me in the asshole, them in your mind. So you're clear with yourself about your expectations and feelings. I love how I make notes for myself so I can stay on track and don't like make dirty jokes in the podcast. And then I can't even fucking say the words that I wrote. Often that approach entails drawing hard boundaries around your time and energy to allow for a functional relationship with a difficult person without exposing you to their negativity. In some cases, like with a toxic colleague at work or a dangerous partner in your life, it might mean dealing with that person at arm's length or through an intermediary. But if a toxic person's behavior is truly egregious, and there are those motherfuckers out there, you know them, and the only way to protect yourself is to explicitly cease all contact with them, then you might need to formally distance yourself from them. Toxic parents, longtime friends, and partners might fall into this category. And in those cases, you'll have to tell the person that your relationship is changing so that they know where you stand and they recognize how their behavior needs to change. The next one is to draw a clear-cut, concise line in the sand, which is just, again, a boundary. And I know that you guys are like, Katie, Jesus, all you do is talk about boundaries. Yes, because it's important. Boundaries is what can make or break your fucking ambitious life. It's one of the life makers and breakers, okay? So you got to get clear on what you want this toxic relationship to look like going forward. Do you want no contact at all? Some contact, but with limits on what you and the other person do and say? The same amount of contact as before, but with healthier needs and clear expectations. And as we've seen, every toxic relationship requires a different approach. Like this is going to be work, just letting you know ahead of time. But whatever change you feel you need to make, you will have to enforce that change with the help of strong, pristine, impeccable, clear-cut, and concise boundaries. Boundaries can include time limits around your time, energy, emotional availability, the subjects that you and the other person discuss, the behavior or language you'll tolerate, the nature and the intimacy of your relationship, the practical use of your engagement, the standards and expectations that you have, and the way you will or perhaps won't resolve future conflicts. Like you may say like, hey, this is how I feel. And if you do this again, like I have to completely stop talking to you because this is not healthy for me and it's not helping me be the best, most ambitious woman that I can be. This is the centerpiece of cutting a toxic person off. Whether it's refusing to speak to another person again, only seeing them once a year in certain contexts, or keeping your interactions to certain safe topics or activities, these behaviors are your best weapon in defending against problematic toxic people. So we take some time going forward. This may be journaling for you or just thinking, meditating on it, get super clear on what the boundaries around these people are. And then when the time and the right place happen, communicate with them to the other person or people or adopt them yourself and act accordingly. So if the person can't handle the boundaries, then you're going to have to adopt them and you're going to have to plan accordingly and you're going to have to act accordingly. It's bottom line. The next one is choose your method of communication. The nature of your relationship and the stakes of the decision to cut someone off will determine the best medium for the news. So if you're breaking up with a toxic partner, a friend, a parent, that might deserve an in-person conversation, assuming, of course, that seeing the person face-to-face won't put you at serious physical or emotional risk. Sometimes it's not good. Okay. I've done boundaries in the past with ex-boyfriends and I've had my ass completely beat and annihilated. So you got to like know what you're getting yourself into before you do that. Right. Sometimes meeting in a public place like a restaurant or a park is a smart decision. And if it prevents the toxic person from becoming hostile or violent, great. Also, if things take a turn for the worst, you can simply leave and there will be plenty of witnesses around. I don't really I'm too old for that shit. You may still be there wherever you are, but that's not what I'm about to do. But God bless if that's what you're going to do. And if you're distancing yourself from a newer acquaintance or a colleague, then a brief email or text is completely inappropriate. Is completely appropriate. And in some cases, that might even be the best course of action since written communication is useful documentation in workplace conflicts or legal situations. Writing a letter can also be cathartic and help articulate your thoughts more clearly without being drawn into an argument. Like my stepdaughter, she likes to write things because she just gets overwhelmed quickly and emotional. So she's like, I don't want to cry. I don't want to be upset. I'd rather just write something down and like get my thoughts on paper, and I'd like say kudos to you for that and knowing yourself that that's how you have to roll. And in some exceptional cases, and there are some exceptional cases, you might need to deliver the news through an intermediary. For example, if you ask a friend to tell a dangerous partner that you're moving on, or a boss needs to tell a problematic employee to stay away from you, just consider the risk factors involved in bringing a third party into the equation. Okay. The next thing is, don't overly justify your decision. While it's important to know your reasons for cutting someone off, you don't always need to explain those reasons fully to the other party. Sometimes overly justifying your decision will only provoke a toxic person further. So, when you make a decision to pull back, get clear on how much information you need to provide to this person. It's perfectly acceptable to tell a toxic person that you're not comfortable with the relationship you had and that you need to redefine it. You don't necessarily need to explain every nuance of your decision, every nook and cranny of your feelings, every talking point in your explanation. Cutting a toxic person off is not a trial. It's not a negotiation. It's simply a choice that you yourself, as a sovereign, autonomous bitch, get to communicate on your terms. In general, the best policy is to be brief, respectful, and simple, period. And please expect a response, because usually toxic people, especially if they're narcissists, they have to get the last word. They gotta say the last word. They always have to do this. This is just, it's fucking poster child. It's textbook. So toxic people, as you know, that we discussed earlier in the podcast, rarely respond to boundaries or breakups well. And at a minimum, they'll probably be angry, hurt, or threatened by your decision. In severe cases, they may try to violate your new boundaries to maintain the relationship you had before. If the toxic person is also wrestling with mental illness, which many are, a personality disorder, say, they may even become more obsessed with you. It's scary, and it's happened to me in the past. The thought of having access to you, the thought of not having access to you will be intolerable to them, and they'll fight tooth and nail to preserve the connection that you've just broken. So when you cut a toxic person off, prepare for any range of reactions. And remember that their response is not a referendum on your decision. Their feelings don't dictate whether you have the right to define the relationship. And you also have to prepare for any feelings that their feelings kick up in you, such as guilt and shame and fear. And those feelings are not an indication that you've done something wrong. They're almost always an indication that you are rewriting an old script, an old narrative, and you're getting rid of old programming. And the feeling of standing up to yourself is so foreign that it's giving rise to new and complex feeling, which, of course, is usually a sign that you've done the right thing, you're growing, and you're becoming the HBIC in your life, and you're standing in your power. And you have to hold on to your boundaries. So you can't just do it for a week and be like, oh, okay, I feel better, and then go back to the old way, because that is giving people mixed messages. And it's really the hardest thing for me is maintaining the boundaries long term. So toxic people have a tendency to challenge boundaries, as we all know, either subtly or overtly. And you must be prepared to defend the line you've drawn, whether that means limiting the amount of time you spend with them, keeping certain topics or experiences off limits, or having no contact whatsoever. And this will probably require reserves of conviction and patience and energy on your part. And you're also going to have to remain hyper vigilant for small inroads, an innocent hello, a casual favor, a small project that subtly breaches the line that you've drawn in the past. And not to mention, in the digital age, holding your boundaries also means protecting yourself online. You might need to block the other person on social media. You may need to filter their messages, or simply have a plan on how to respond if that comes up. And like a traditional inbox, social media is somewhere between a means of communication and the real world. The more potential contact you have with a toxic person digitally, the greater the chances that you'll explore yourself to further abuse, or inadvertently give them more data and ammunition. The best approach to holding a boundary is to simply communicate your stance. Like, I'm sorry, but this isn't a conversation I'm able to have with you right now. And I understand you're upset, but I'm not interested in rehashing an old argument. And this is the way our relationship has to be right now. And you are well within your right to firmly restate your boundaries. And at the end of the interaction, as we saw, agreeing to renegotiate with a problematic person is a common toxic trap. So I want to just say one last thing before we wrap up here today, because I know a lot of you guys are dealing with toxic people in your life. I get so many messages, which I love getting from you guys. And if you have a comment, a concern, a question, a message, please email me at help, HELP, at kbmfc.com. I answer all the emails there. I love getting those types of emails. But the last thing I will say is you have to work on yourself every day, getting yourself to be a better, more ambitious woman, be a better, more ambitious person. Because when you do that, a lot of these toxic people are just going to fall away naturally. You're not going to have to do a lot of work to get rid of them because their vibrational frequency and yours is going to be so abrasive to one another that they're going to probably not want to be around you in the first place because you're going to be vibing so high that they're never going to be able to live up to that standard of your vibrational frequency. And so that's one of the biggest things that I do is I just every day when I wake up, I talk to God and I say, God, please help me be the best person I can be, the best version of myself. And like I said earlier in the podcast, I always ask myself, is the thing that I'm about to do, is the person I'm about to spend time with, is the action I'm about to make going to help me get closer to or further away to the ambitious woman that I want to be? And if the answer is no, it's not going to help you, I ain't doing it. I ain't hanging out with you. I ain't spending time with you. I'm not spending money on it. I'm not eating there. I'm not going there. I'm not showing my face there because my presence is a present. And that goes for all of you out there in ambitious land too. I hope to God that this podcast really got in your heads today because you only have this one precious human life. And I don't want to see you squander it on toxicity and negativity and just spending time with people who don't deserve you, period. I hope that this helped. And if you feel like this podcast will help others, please share it on your social media. Extra points if you tag me. I always love to send little gifts to people when they post and they tag the Ambitchious podcast because this truly is a movement. Being ambitious is a global movement. And I can't do this alone. I need each and every one of you to share this, to talk about being ambitious, and to also show up as the HBIC of your ambitious life, because the more people across the globe that do that, the world will change. Okay. So I love you. In the meantime, don't forget to stay ambitious, and I will see you next Tuesday.